Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Welcome to the Chair, and may I warmly congratulate the Defence Secretary on his new role, and strongly endorse the comments he made about Britain's armed forces. My own regiment has recently been in the front line in Estonia, and I want to very strongly endorse the words that he used. Can I also endorse the advice he gave to new members as they sit on these green benches? I first sat on these green benches on that side 37 years ago, and I strongly agree with what he said, and I feel that sense of honour and privilege every day in this House. Madam Deputy Speaker, I had hoped to start by welcoming the Foreign Secretary to his place. I wanted to wish him well in discharging the immense responsibilities of the office he now holds. And I have to say, I was dismayed to hear the Foreign Secretary answer questions on the Today programme this morning, which should more properly have been answered in this House, a view I believe that the Speaker holds. Nevertheless, I have no doubt that the Foreign Secretary will be very well served by the outstanding civil servants at the Foreign Office. I want to express my gratitude to our ambassadors and high commissioners around the world. On overseas visits throughout my tenure, I was superbly served and looked after, and I want also to thank the outstanding young officials who worked in my private office. I should also like to pay a special tribute to my noble friend Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton. He demonstrated clear strategic thinking about how British foreign policy needed to adapt to the world as it is today, and injected real energy into British diplomacy. I hope the whole House will acknowledge that to persuade a former Prime Minister to serve as Foreign Secretary was a real benefit to our country. And it was also a pleasure to serve alongside the former members for Berwick-upon-Tweed and Macclesfield, who I'm very sorry are no longer sitting alongside me on the front bench. They were both superb ministers who worked diligently at the Foreign Office. Madam Deputy Speaker, I cannot recall a more perilous period in international affairs. I entered the House of Commons just 2 years before the momentous fall of the Berlin Wall, which precipitated the demise of the Soviet Union and the consequent end of the Cold War. It is difficult to overstate, having lived with the terrifying spectre of nuclear confrontation, the collective relief we all felt. And yet, the world is once again in the grip of a galloping escalation of tensions and dangers, where the international institutions created on the heels of the Second World War to defend our values and protect mankind are being undermined, where the narrow nationalism that so disfigured our continent is once again rearing its destructive head, and where despots and dictators increasingly ride roughshod over democratic freedoms and the rules-based order. And Putin's brutal and illegal invasion of Ukraine has brought war once again to the European continent. The Israel-Gaza conflict is devastating and risks regional conflagration. Poverty and debt stalk the global south. Yet COVID taught us that no one is safe until we are all safe, while climate change is the greatest existential threat of our time. Never have we faced dangers so grave, where our fates are so closely entwined. So at the very time when we need an international rules-based order to tackle these common threats, climate change, migration, terror, and pandemics, we are more fragmented than ever. Divisions are hardening and debate is coarsening. Of course I give way.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable neighbour, and I'm delighted to see him in his place on that side of the chamber. But can I take it from his remarks that he is subscribing to the view that not only do we need a rules-based order, but a rights-based order? And here in our country, and indeed in Europe, the framework for those rights is the European Convention on Human Rights. Are we to take it from his remark today that it is the policy of His Majesty's loyal opposition that we should remain a member of the ECHR?
Well, that is certainly the policy of the opposition, and I hope it's common across the House that we should remain part of the European Convention. So I was talking about divisions hardening and the debate coarsening. Public discourse is increasingly vitriolic, be it in pursuit of single-issue causes or broader agendas, be it from the left or the right, driven by motives that may be religious or not, that may be well-intentioned or not. And the challenge this presents to British foreign policy is immense. Britain has punched above its weight precisely because of our leadership role in the international system. And our role now, as His Majesty's opposition, is to hold the government to account, but also to give the strongest possible support where we can. And I hope that we can work constructively, as our two parties have done hitherto. In opposition, we will continue to make the case that Britain must be a force for good, that it is outward-looking and global in perspective, that we stand up for internationalism and cooperation, stand against populism and isolationism, and stand with the world's poorest and most vulnerable. I'll give way in a moment. I'm very proud of the Conservative Party's record in government on all those fronts. We stood firmly behind Ukraine. We worked day and night with international partners to maximise the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza, while supporting negotiations to secure the release of the Israeli hostages. And we produced a groundbreaking white paper on international development that drew in the support of all political parties in tackling global poverty in a complex geopolitical environment. I give way, yes.
I'm very grateful to the Shadow Secretary of State for his comments. One duty of the opposition is to point out blind spots, and when we talk about security in the King's speech, one thing that wasn't mentioned was food security. Now, for a rural community like mine that has 85% agricultural base, food security is really important. We've seen that with the attacks on Ukraine and the grain coming out of it. What can he make sure he will do in shadow opposition to hold the opposition to account, to make sure we have food security on these isles?
Well, he's quite right about the importance of food security. He will remember that the then Prime Minister launched the Global Food Security Summit last November in Britain. It's not just an issue for us, it's an issue, as he rightly says, all around the world, and we will continue to press the government to take it as seriously as we did. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to expand on some of the issues which I anticipate will remain dominant themes over the course of this Parliament. First of all, with Ukraine, Britain's work in supporting Ukraine is a shining example of cross-party cooperation. I pay tribute to the party opposite for the constructive approach they demonstrated while in opposition. And the government can rely on us to continue in that spirit, because the struggle in Ukraine is an existential issue. Let no one believe that Putin will stop at Ukraine if he is victorious in this struggle. And our support for Ukraine in the face of Putin's brutality remains unwavering, and I know the government's position is the same. We welcome the government keeping in place the commitment we made to spend at least £3 billion a year on military support for Ukraine for as long as is necessary. And in government, Madam Deputy Speaker, we were also a leading advocate for sanctioned Russian assets being used to support Ukraine and for ensuring Russia pays for the destruction it has caused. I urge the new government to push the international community to coalesce around the most ambitious solution possible to achieve these important aims. And on these benches, we welcome the declaration agreed at the NATO summit, to which the Defence Secretary referred in Washington last week, which committed to support Ukraine, and I quote, on its irreversible path to full Euro-Atlantic integration, including NATO membership. It is right that the government also committed to this in the gracious speech. In relation to the Middle East, we want to see the conflict in Gaza come to a sustainable end as quickly as possible. Our view remains that a negotiated pause in the fighting is the best way to secure the release of the hostages, enable a significant scaling up of much-needed humanitarian aid, and help bring about the conditions that will allow for a permanent end to hostilities. This is the plan Britain championed in New York and which secured the consent of the international community at the UN. There is, Madam Deputy Speaker, a deal on the table to achieve these goals, backed by Israel, the United States and the United Nations Security Council. The onus is now on Hamas to accept it and bring to an end the suffering of the Palestinian people and the hostages who remain in such awful jeopardy. And the government must build on our hard work to see aid reach those in Gaza who desperately need it. The Conservative government trebled its aid commitment in the last financial year and did everything possible to get more aid into Gaza by land, sea and air. Israel has committed to increasing the amount of aid reaching Gaza. The government of Israel must be held to account for delivering on its promises. But I want to signal a note of caution, which links into my comments earlier about composure. I'm acutely aware of the very strong feelings the conflict in Gaza has elicited. It is probably the most polarising foreign policy issue of our time, which has played out on the streets of our country, on our university campuses, and in our politics, even forming the entire basis for some candidates in the general election who are now with us in the House of Commons. We must remember that this remains an incredibly complex issue. The questions and challenges around resolving the current conflict and achieving this two-state solution we all want to see are profoundly difficult. We have a responsibility to set a sensible and respectful tone in the many debates we will continue to have and make clear that there is no room in our democracy for threats of violence and intimidation. We require serious solutions and long-term measured policies, not performative politics or short-term symbolic proclamations. We should certainly recognise the state of Palestine, but it must be at the right time as part of an overall solution. To do so prematurely could send a signal that terror pays. And I urge the government to resist the siren calls of those who wish to demonise the State of Israel and who draw a moral equivalence between the Hamas leadership and the democratically elected government of Israel in a bid to isolate and delegitimise it. While we are all appalled at the dreadful loss of life in Gaza, we must never forget the horror unleashed by Hamas on Israel on the 7th of October, the deadliest terrorist attack in Israel's history, to which the Right Honourable Gentleman so rightly referred. The Conservative Party stands foursquare behind Israel's right to defend itself, but it must be in accordance with international humanitarian law. And we must not lose sight of the fact that this is, at its heart, a tale of two just causes, of two people's legitimate aspirations for national sovereignty, security and dignity. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are also other crises around the world which must preoccupy the government. I refer particularly to the crisis that has engulfed Sudan, the worst displacement now of people anywhere in the world. We are seeing clear evidence of ethnic cleansing once again in Darfur. We urge the government to continue our efforts to pressure the warring parties in Sudan to cease hostilities and to push hard for humanitarian support to reach those desperate people, including those I saw on the border with Chad earlier this year. The government must also continue to hold to account those regimes around the world committing appalling acts, whether that's Iran, Myanmar, North Korea and Russia, where we must push for the immediate release of Vladimir Kara-Murza. Finally, I know the Foreign Secretary will want to work closely with the governments of Gibraltar and Spain and take a hands-on approach to securing a good deal for the ROC's future prosperity, and we will also be following closely the very important negotiations over the future of Diego Garcia. Madam Deputy Speaker, I turn briefly and directly to the gracious speech. In spite of their legitimate desire for yet another defence review, I think the government has made a mistake in not honouring immediately our commitment to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2030. I know the Shadow Defence Secretary will say more about this later, but this gives the wrong signal to our allies and adversaries about our determination to confront the multitude of dangers the world faces. In 2014, the Conservative government made the commitment to spend 2% of GDP on defence. The UK led the way, and many NATO allies have followed, and we have now led the way with our commitment to move to 2.5% of GDP by 2030. And the benches opposite should be in no doubt either that we will place under the microscope any decisions they may make on our nuclear deterrent. On the subject of Europe, we welcome the closest possible partnership with our friends and neighbours, subject to respecting the results of the referendum and the will of our constituents over Brexit. Today's most important summit at Blenheim served up oven ready by my right honourable friend, the former Prime Minister, is a chance to underline the effective way that the UK has worked with our European partners in response to the invasion of Ukraine, and has shown that although we are outside the EU, we can indeed work together effectively. The upcoming Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which I'm delighted was referenced in the gracious speech, will be an opportunity to show real ambition for the Commonwealth. In government, we offered strong support for Samoa's hosting of CHOGM and their desire to use this platform to enhance Commonwealth countries' resilience to global challenges. And I urge the new government to continue working closely with Samoa to make the most of this CHOGM and to mobilise action across the Commonwealth, including to boost trade and investment and enhance access to climate finance. Madam Deputy Speaker, I wish to conclude by addressing an issue that is very close to my heart and many others across the House, but which in many ways links all of these themes together. I was privileged to return to government as Minister for International Development, a brief I held previously in 2010 as Secretary of State, where for many in their darkest moments after flood, earthquake and disaster, Britain has been a beacon of hope and of light. Now, 70 million people are falling back into poverty, millions of girls are out of school, famines stalk the lands of East Africa, and children are starving to death. The anger and frustration of the Global South is palpable. Of course, I made no secret, Madam Deputy Speaker, of my dismay that the overseas aid budget was cut and that DFID was merged into the Foreign Office. And my job as Deputy Foreign Secretary was to look forward to try to make the merger work after a tumultuous start and set out a pathway to return to 0.7. But development is about much more than money. Our recent white paper crafted new approaches that reflect the changing world around us. We formulated creative ways of mobilising new and additional funds to ensure the Sustainable Development Goals are able to get back on track. I'm very proud of the leadership our former Prime Minister has shown on the Green Climate Fund and the Global Fund, where Britain was right at the forefront both of ensuring these funds improved and of fully replenishing them. And I hope the new government will do the same with the IDA World Bank replenishment and with Gavi. We made the case that international development must be owned by the British people. I submit that this is not a Conservative, Labour or Liberal policy, it is a British policy, and we must all unite behind the goal of bringing the British people behind the agenda as set out so clearly in the White Paper. All British development money is spent in our national interest because it helps heal the grotesque discrepancies of opportunity and wealth which disfigure our world. And we will continue, Madam Deputy Speaker, to stand up for the world's poorest and most vulnerable, calling for the continued reform of the international financial system to free up funding for climate finance, debt relief and achieving the SDGs. We will continue to stand up for women and girls with the same vigour we exhibited in government, whether in relation to female genital mutilation, women's rights or LGBTQ rights, and we will press for a bolstering of the coping mechanisms of countries on the front line of climate shocks. Finally, we will be keeping a close eye on whether or not the D in FCDO falls silent once more. Development is only as effective as the structures and expertise behind it. I tried hard in office to strengthen the development silo in the Foreign Office with some, but frankly not enough, success. I stress in the strongest terms that development cannot be a sideshow. People's lives depend upon it. But the Foreign Office system is built around diplomacy with the panoply of resources focused on the Foreign Secretary's priorities. I hope the government keeps this in mind. Development deserves the attention and energy afforded to diplomacy, and with the right strategic adjustments, development and diplomacy could make for a mighty partnership. But it will require proactive leadership, and if, despite the best efforts, this cannot be achieved under the merger, and this will become clearer sooner rather than later during this Parliament, I will urge the government to move swiftly and decisively to Plan B. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is of course easy to despair at the state of the world, so I hope to end on a more sanguine note. I'm long enough in the tooth to have lived through the ebbs and flows of different eras, conflicts and crises. I've witnessed the worst in humanity, but also the best. I've learned that the bleakest moments offer the greatest opportunities. But history teaches us that most things don't come to an end, they are brought to an end. We do have the power to change things for the better, to build a safer and more prosperous world, but we can't do it alone. Only international cooperation can deliver the progress we seek. I sincerely hope the new government will succeed. The future of all of us depends on that success. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.